Bartenders should stick to pouring drinks, not pretending they understand real soldiers' business. One lieutenant laughed, drawing smirks from the corner table. Marina only smiled faintly, polishing a glass, her eyes calm. Then, bang! The bar door slammed open. A bloodied Navy SEAL limped inside, rain dripping from his gear, his gaze locked on the quiet bartender. "Code Ironfall," he said, and every soldier froze. Without a word, Marina reached under the counter, pulling out a hidden black device. The air filled with a coded signal no one recognized. The SEAL turned to them and said, "She's not your bartender. She's Shadow Lynx. And 6 years ago, she saved my life." And in that instant, every story they thought they knew about her was about to be rewritten. The rain always seemed heavier near Base 47 Echo. Maybe it was the coastal winds. Maybe it was the weight of the stories carried by the men and women who passed through. Either way, it drummed a steady rhythm against the windows of the Voss Tavern, a low-lit, wood-paneled bar tucked into the corner of a narrow street. Inside, the world was warm, amber light pooling beneath hanging lamps, the faint scent of oak and spilled whiskey lingering in the air. Behind the polished counter stood Marina Voss, a figure so consistent in her movements that newcomers barely noticed her at all. Early 30s, sharp-featured but calm-eyed, she wore a plain black shirt and an apron, her long brown hair tied neatly back. Most people assumed she was just another small-town bartender, content to pour beer, mix the occasional whiskey sour, and wipe down the counter between shifts. But Marina noticed everything. From her position behind the bar, she could read the entire room without seeming to look. The way Corporal Ray's right leg bounced faster when talk turned to deployment schedules. The slight tremor in Sergeant Lowell's hand when he lifted his glass. A tremor that hadn't been there 3 months ago. The rigid posture of Private Kincaid, shoulders squared as if he was still on parade, even off duty. The regulars knew her as Voss or simply Marina, depending on how many drinks they'd had. They knew she poured generously, remembered their favorite tables, and never pushed for small talk. Some took her silence as aloofness. Others called it professionalism. Few realized it was observation, constant, measured, and deliberate. The bar itself was a strange hybrid of military memorabilia and coastal charm. A framed photo of the base's first commander hung above the counter, flanked by model ships and an old radio that still crackled on certain frequencies. The shelves behind her were lined with liquor bottles and keepsakes gifted by regulars. A challenge coin from a special operations unit, a weathered compass, a folded American flag encased in glass. Every evening, the place filled with a blend of local soldiers, visiting personnel, and the occasional civilian contractor. Some came to celebrate, others to drown memories they'd rather not keep. Marina moved among them quietly, refilling drinks, delivering food, or sliding a glass of water towards someone who'd had one too many. And when trouble brewed, she had a way of stopping it before it started. One night, 2 young infantrymen began jawing at each other over a game of darts, voices rising, shoulders squaring. Marina didn't raise her own voice. She simply stepped between them with 2 fresh beers, setting them down with a firm, deliberate clink. "On the house," she said evenly. The tension broke, the darts game resumed, and no one seemed to notice the way her eyes had been watching their hands, measuring the distance to the nearest glass bottle, the weight of a clenched fist. Another time, she caught sight of a pale, sweating lieutenant gripping the edge of the bar. Without a word, she reached for bottled water and a small packet of salt, stirring it into a glass. She slid it to him just as his breathing began to quicken. He drank, and the panic in his eyes faded to confusion, then relief. When he asked how she knew, she just shrugged. "Guess I've seen enough hangovers to know the difference." But the truth was, Marina didn't just know hangovers. She knew symptoms. She knew the difference between a drunk who'd gone too far and a soldier on the edge of a breakdown. She knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. To most, the Voss Tavern was just a stop between duty shifts and barracks. To Marina, it was something else entirely. A place where soldiers could be human, if only for a few hours. She'd built it that way on purpose, though no one knew why. And as the rain outside swelled to a heavy, rhythmic pounding, Marina polished another glass, her eyes scanning the room with the quiet precision of someone who was never really just anything. Marina Voss had learned long ago that words were often the least important part of a conversation. In her line of work, or rather, the work she had chosen for herself now, truth lived in the details most people overlooked. A soldier could sit at her bar and talk for hours without revealing a thing, but their body would give them away within minutes. She read people like others read maps. The way someone carried their shoulders told her whether they'd spent the day on patrol or locked in an office. The pitch of a voice could tell her how much sleep they'd had, or if they'd been drinking before they walked in. A glance toward the door every few minutes meant more than impatience. It meant they were measuring escape routes, a habit that didn't fade after deployment. To the untrained eye, her patrons were just tired soldiers unwinding after work. To Marina, each was a case study. She noticed when Sergeant Holloway started tapping his thumb against his glass every time someone raised their voice, a reflex born from too many nights waiting for explosions that never came. She caught the way Corporal Mendez stopped wearing his watch, leaving a pale band of skin on his wrist. In her experience, that usually meant an aversion to reminders of time, a side effect of PTSD in some veterans who'd lived through extended hostage situations or long sieges. Alcohol was its own kind of tell. Some drank to socialize, others to sleep. Then there were the ones who didn't taste their drinks at all, downing them like medication. Marina saw it in the hard swallow, the tight grip on the glass, the fixed gaze on nothing in particular. That wasn't drinking for enjoyment. That was dosing oneself night after night. She never confronted them outright. A bartender's questions could feel invasive if pushed too far. Instead, she used subtle interventions, a free glass of water alongside the next beer, a comment about the kitchen's new menu to distract them from ordering another round too quickly, an offer to run a tab so they had to speak to her before closing, a moment for her to quietly check their state before they walked out into the night. Marina understood something the others didn't. The most dangerous wounds were invisible. The military taught soldiers to push through pain, to keep their heads up, to never let anyone see weakness. That worked on the battlefield. Off it, it left too many men and women bleeding in ways no medic could see. She'd seen it before. Soldiers who seemed fine until they weren't. The corporal who used to joke with everyone until one day he didn't show up for his shift. The officer who hosted poker nights every Friday, then stopped answering his phone. It was the silence that worried her most. On certain nights, she'd watch a table of young soldiers laughing, and she could tell which ones would still be laughing in a year, and which ones were already slipping into something darker. It wasn't fortune-telling. It was the weight in their posture, the delay before they joined the joke, the way their eyes flickered when someone mentioned home. She never claimed to fix anyone, but she believed in something simpler, creating a space where the mask could slip, even for a moment. In her experience, you couldn't help someone until they felt safe enough to be seen. And in a town where the uniform carried both pride and burden, safety was a rare currency. From behind the bar, Marina moved like a conductor guiding an orchestra only she could hear, adjusting her tone to match the mood, steering conversations away from triggers, diffusing tension before it boiled over. Most nights no one noticed, and that was fine. She didn't do it for the recognition. Because for Marina Voss, reading the language of a soldier wasn't just habit. It was a duty, one she carried quietly in the amber light of a small bar that had become a refuge without anyone realizing it. The night was already loud before it happened. Rain hammered against the windows of Voss Tavern, the air inside thick with the smell of beer and fried food. Off-duty soldiers crowded around dartboards and tables, voices raised in friendly arguments. The old radio on the back shelf murmured static beneath the chatter. Marina Voss moved from one end of the bar to the other, topping off pints and sliding plates of wings to waiting hands, her expression the same calm mask it always was. Then, bang! The door slammed open so hard it rattled the glassware. A rush of cold, wet air swept into the room, carrying the metallic scent of blood. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. Framed in the doorway was a man in full tactical gear, or what was left of it. His Navy SEAL insignia was barely visible beneath streaks of mud and crimson. Rain dripped from his helmet and down the side of his face, mingling with the blood from a gash above his brow. His left leg was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Dark with fresh bleeding, he didn't limp so much as drag himself forward, each step heavy but deliberate. Chief Ryan Calder. Several soldiers in the bar recognized him instantly. His name carried weight, the kind of reputation that didn't need a story to back it. But whatever they thought they knew about why he was here, it was clear this was no social call. Calder's eyes swept the room once, sharp and assessing, before locking on the bartender. "Code Ironfall," he said, his voice hoarse but loud enough to cut through the stunned silence. For a beat, the room stayed frozen. A captain near the corner blinked in confusion. A private muttered, "What the hell is Ironfall?" under his breath. But Marina didn't ask. She didn't gasp, didn't demand an explanation, didn't even glance at the others. She simply set down the glass she'd been polishing, turned toward the far end of the counter, and knelt. From beneath the bar, her hand found a recessed panel that no one had ever noticed before. It slid open with a muted click, revealing a small compartment lined with waterproof casing. Inside was a matte black device no bigger than a paperback book, its surface dotted with blinking LEDs. The murmurs in the bar grew louder. "Is that a beacon? Who authorized her to have that?" Ignoring them, Marina placed the device on the counter beside the old radio. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. She flipped a hidden latch on the radio side, revealing a port that most people assumed was decorative. The device clicked into place with a magnetic lock, and the LEDs began pulsing in a sequence too deliberate to be random. A faint tone filled the air, low, steady, and alien to anyone who hadn't heard it before. The captain from the corner finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to know what you're—" "Stand down, Captain." Calder's voice, though rough, carried the kind of authority that made people obey before thinking. His eyes never left Marina. "She knows exactly what she's doing, and you don't have the clearance to understand it." The tension in the room thickened. Someone whispered, "Clearance? For a bartender?" Another hissed, "She's not just a bartender, is she?" Marina adjusted a dial on the radio, fine-tuning the signal. The static shifted, replaced by a faint rhythm. 3 short bursts, too long. She reached into the compartment again and pulled out a second device, this one resembling an old field communicator, disguised as a broken radio part. Her voice was calm, measured. "Signal uplink established. Frequency locked." For the first time, she looked at Calder directly. "How many?" His answer was clipped, military. 3 KIA, 2 wounded. I'm the only one mobile." He rattled off a set of coordinates, the numbers rapid and precise. Marina keyed them in without hesitation. Around the bar, soldiers stood in uneasy silence, watching the woman they thought they knew transform into someone entirely different. Someone with the poise and authority of a seasoned operator. The coded signal continued to pulse, filling the tavern with its steady, almost hypnotic beat. Rain pounded harder against the windows, as if underscoring the urgency of the moment. Without looking up, Marina spoke into the communicator. "Ironfall protocol active. Immediate extraction required. 2 wounded, 1 mobile. Holding position at designated fallback." A brief burst of static answered, then a clear voice. "Copy, Ironfall. Shadow Lynx, confirm identity." Marina's tone didn't change. "Shadow Lynx, authentication code Delta 7 Kappa." The line went quiet for a second. Then, "Confirmed. Extraction inbound. ETA 52 minutes. She disconnected, eyes still locked on the blinking device. The rest of the bar stayed silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on every soul inside. And in that silence, it was impossible to see her as just the bartender ever again. The silence in Voss Tavern was thick enough to feel. The only sounds were the steady patter of rain against the windows and the pulsing tone from the black device on the bar. Every soldier in the room was frozen in place, eyes darting between Chief Ryan Calder and Marina Voss. Ryan took a slow breath, his shoulders heavy. "You all think you know who she is," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "But that's because she's been letting you think it. The truth is, Marina Voss isn't your bartender. She's Shadow Lynx, Cerberus Unit's medical response specialist and extraction coordinator." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Some looked skeptical, others just stared. One corporal whispered, "Cerberus Unit? That's a ghost story." Ryan shook his head. "It's no ghost story. It's a unit so far off the books it didn't exist to anyone who didn't need to know. Their job was simple on paper. Get in, save lives, get out. In reality, it meant operating in places no one else could reach, when regular forces couldn't extract, when medevac was impossible, when the window for survival was measured in minutes. Marina didn't flinch. Her hands kept working the communicator, fine-tuning the uplink, but her eyes were locked on Ryan now. He was bringing up a past she had spent years burying. 2018, Ryan continued. I was part of Operation Glass Dagger, hostile territory in the Khorassani Highlands. Intel said a group of Allied operatives were being held in a repurposed mining complex. We were to extract them before they could be moved across the border. He paused, the memory sharpening in his tone. We went in clean. Insertion was perfect. But intel was rotten. The site was crawling with hostile forces, and they were ready for us. Ambush from 3 angles. 2 men down in the first 60 seconds. Our medic caught a round in the leg. We were pinned, bleeding, and 100 clicks from any kind of support. Ryan glanced toward Marina. That's when command sent in Cerberus. The soldiers listening leaned forward. She came in under night cover, he said. No team, just her. She carried a medic's kit, a suppressed sidearm, and a satchel with enough comms gear to coordinate a ghost fleet. She moved through that complex like she'd built it herself. By the time she reached us, she'd already treated 1 wounded local ally she found along the way. Marina remembered it differently. Not the heroics, but the grit. The way the air in the tunnels smelled of rust and cordite. The heat of a bullet passing close enough to singe fabric. The way her hands ached from applying tourniquets in near darkness, counting every breath of the injured to keep them anchored to life. Ryan's voice cut through her memory. She stabilized our medic, sealed an arterial bleed on Captain Weller using nothing but field gauze, a combat knife, and a strip of her own shirt. Then she called in a diversion strike to buy us 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's all it took for her to get 6 of us moving, 2 of them on stretchers out of that kill box. He looked around the room. We made it to the extraction point, but the cost was high. We lost 4 that night. And Cerberus unit, well, you can't run missions like that without being seen eventually. Their cover was blown. Officially, the program ended. Unofficially, every operator disappeared into deep cover. Marina finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Some of us were sent to places like this, out of sight, out of mind. Keep the protocols alive in case someone needed us again. Ryan nodded. 6 years she's been here. 6 years playing the part of a bartender, keeping her skills and equipment hidden, waiting for a code word she might never hear again. There was a weight in the way he said it. Not just respect, but an understanding of what that meant. Living under deep cover wasn't just about keeping a secret. It was the slow erosion of identity. You learned to smile at people who didn't know your name. You swallowed memories you couldn't share. Every instinct you'd honed in the field had to be hidden under the routine of pouring drinks and wiping counters. And every time the door opened, a small part of you wondered if this was the day the past would walk in. Marina had lost count of how many times she'd thought about leaving. But Cerberus had a rule. The mission lasts until you're relieved. No one had ever relieved her. Now, with Calder standing in front of her, bleeding and alive only because she'd once broken protocol to save him, she knew why she'd stayed. The rain outside pounded harder. The coded signal kept pulsing, and the room understood. Whatever they thought they knew about the quiet woman behind the bar, the truth was something far more dangerous and far more loyal than they'd ever imagined. The coded pulse from the black device continued its steady rhythm, but Marina's eyes were on the communicator's small display. Numbers flickered, coordinates locked in. Then the signal stuttered. Shadow Lynx, we're getting intermittent reception, came a voice through the static. Say again, over. Marina's jaw tightened. Copy, you're breaking up. Stand by while I boost the signal. She reached under the bar, pulling out a battered metal case no one had ever seen before. Inside, foam padding held a compact signal booster, disguised as an old transistor amp. She connected it to the radio with a short cable, fingers moving with the muscle memory of someone who had done this in far worse conditions. Ryan watched her work, but didn't interfere. He knew better. This was her domain now. The soldiers in the bar whispered among themselves, but they stayed back, as if proximity alone might pull them into whatever classified storm had just swept in. Shadow Lynx, this is Ironfall 2. The voice was weak, strained, one of the wounded. Rodriguez's condition deteriorating. We've got incoming movement on the ridge. Estimate 20 hostiles, maybe more. Over. Marina's reply was immediate. Copy 2. Maintain cover and do not engage unless breached. Extraction inbound in 48 mics. Hold your ground. Before the voice could answer, the lights in the tavern flickered, then died. The low hum of refrigeration units fell silent, leaving only the sound of rain and the beeping of the beacon. A few soldiers cursed under their breath. The captain started toward the breaker room, but Marina stopped him with a raised hand. Don't. If power's out across the block, it's not an accident. We keep lights off. Less chance of visual triangulation if someone's trying to locate the signal. Ryan frowned. Think they're tracking the uplink? Or you, she said simply. Either way, we buy ourselves time. She grabbed a small flashlight from the case, clicked it on, and used its narrow beam to check the radio's connection. The static worsened, then cleared again as she fine-tuned the dial by feel. Another voice broke in, sharper, authoritative. Shadow Lynx, this is Raptor Command. We have your coordinates. Be advised, storm front moving in. Extraction window reduced to 30 mics. Recommend reroute to secondary LZ. Marina didn't hesitate. Negative command. Secondary LZ is compromised terrain. We hold original. I'll get them there. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You're arguing with command? She didn't look up. I'm telling them the reality on the ground. A burst of static, then command's curt reply. Understood. Maintain original plan. Raptor out. The bar's patrons could only hear half the conversation, but the change in Marina's posture was unmistakable. Shoulders squared, eyes fixed, voice clipped. She wasn't serving drinks now. She was orchestrating a rescue. Then came the sound they all dreaded. Faint at first, but unmistakable. Interference that wasn't weather-related. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Signal jam. Yeah, she said, already pulling another device from the case, a hand-cranked emergency transmitter. They're trying to blind us. Won't work. She began cranking the handle, the radio's signal meter spiking as the backup power surged through. The voices on the line cleared. Ironfall 2, status, she called. Still holding, came the strained reply. Rodriguez barely conscious. Hostiles moving closer, 30 meters out. Marina's tone was calm, but steel-edged every syllable. 2, listen carefully. When I say move, you head for the extraction point. No stops. Calder will meet you halfway. I'll light the path. Ryan blinked. You're sending me back out? You're mobile, you know the terrain, and they'll follow you if they can't follow me. That gives me a clean line to guide them in. She didn't wait for argument. Ironfall 2, prepare to move in 30 seconds. The next half-minute was a blur of precise adjustments, aligning frequencies, timing bursts of signal between interference sweeps, and marking the route with encrypted GPS pings. Then, in a voice that carried no doubt, she gave the order. Go! Ryan was already moving for the door, his limp barely slowing him as he disappeared into the rain. Marina kept her eyes on the radio, calling out bearings, timing movements so her team in the field slipped between hostile patrols like shadows. Static flared, then cleared. Shadow Lynx, this is Ironfall 2. We see the bird. LZ in sight. Moving in. The tavern stayed silent until the sound of rotor blades, faint but growing, reached their ears. Marina allowed herself a breath. Just one. Extraction complete, came the voice from command. All accounted for. Nice work, Shadow Lynx. She leaned back, switching off the beacon. The lights in the bar flickered back to life, as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the room knew different. They'd just watched a war fought over a radio and won by the woman they'd once called just the bartender. The hum of the bar returned slowly, like a heartbeat settling after a sprint. Outside, the rain softened to a steady drizzle. Ryan Calder sat at the far end of the counter, his leg freshly bandaged, a mug of coffee steaming in front of him. Most of the patrons had drifted out, leaving only a handful who pretended not to eavesdrop. Ryan broke the silence first. You know, when Cerberus was shut down, they told us to disappear. New names, new jobs, no contact. It was supposed to be a clean break. He took a slow sip, eyes distant. But there's one thing they couldn't order us to forget. Marina tilted her head. The mission? He shook his head. The promise. His voice dropped lower, but the weight in it carried. No one gets left behind. Doesn't matter if the program's dead, the chain of command's gone, or the world's forgotten your name. That promise isn't paperwork. It's carved into you. You live by it, or you spend the rest of your life knowing you didn't. Marina met his gaze, and for a moment the calm mask she wore slipped just enough to show something raw beneath. The same understanding. You kept it, Ryan said simply. 6 years of cover, waiting for a call you had no reason to believe would ever come. That's not duty, Marina. That's loyalty. She didn't answer right away. Her hands moved absently, wiping down the counter as if it were just another night. I kept it because someone had to. You think I didn't want to walk away? To live somewhere no one called me Shadow Lynx? She let the question hang before adding, but if I'd left and the call came, what then? Ryan gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then someone dies, and you'd carry that weight. The quiet stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of two people who'd stood in the same storms, just at different times. Finally, Ryan tapped his mug against the counter in a small toast. Programs end. Units disband. But the people, the trust, that's forever. Marina nodded once, and so is the promise. The few soldiers still lingering in the tavern exchanged glances. They didn't know the details, but they understood enough. This was more than a rescue. It was proof that some bonds can't be broken by orders, politics, or time. Outside, the rain eased into nothing. Inside, the Voss Tavern returned to its quiet rhythm, but the air felt changed, as if everyone present had just witnessed a reminder of something old, unshakable, and worth keeping alive. Weeks passed after the Ironfall rescue, but the Voss Tavern didn't change much, at least not on the surface. The same warm glow bathed the wooden walls, the same worn radio murmured in the background, and Marina Voss still stood behind the counter with her quiet, steady presence. What had changed was the way people felt when they stepped inside. Word spread quietly in the kind of murmurs soldiers trust more than official memos. New faces appeared, not for the drinks, but for the atmosphere. Marines, Army medics, Air Force pilots, retired warrant officers, all found their way to the small bar near Base 47 Echo. They came for conversation, for silence, or just to sit in a place where they didn't have to pretend. Marina never asked why they were there. She didn't probe for stories or push advice. Sometimes she slid a coffee across the counter instead of another beer. Sometimes she let someone talk until their voice broke, then simply nodded and kept listening. She had learned in her other life that the smallest acts could hold back the biggest storms. There was no plaque on the wall, no frame commendations. No one called her Shadow Lynx here, not out loud, and that was how she preferred it. Recognition, after all, had never been the point. For some, the Voss Tavern became a place to celebrate small victories. A clean bill of health, a re-enlistment, a friend making it home. For others, it was where they came after bad news to sit among people who understood without needing details. The bar became a neutral ground, where rank didn't matter, and service, past or present, was enough to belong. Every night, Marina kept her quiet watch, the same way she always had. Her eyes moved over the room with the same precision she once used in hostile territory, scanning for the subtle signs. A stiff posture, a restless hand, the kind of silence that spoke of more than fatigue. And when she saw it, she acted gently and without fanfare. Because some missions don't end when you leave the field. And if today you happen to walk through the door of that unassuming little bar, greeted by a calm woman polishing a glass, you might just think she was only the bartender. But ask yourself, if you walked into that cafe today, would you recognize her? In the end, Marina's story isn't just about a secret code or a daring rescue. It's about the quiet kind of courage that still matters in everyday America. We live in a time where recognition is loud, and people measure value in likes, followers, or titles. But this story reminds us that some of the most important work will never make the news. And that's okay. Service, loyalty, and compassion don't need an audience to be real. In communities across the country, there are shadow lynxes of our own. Veterans, teachers, neighbors, even strangers, who watch out for others without asking for credit. They see the signs when someone's struggling, they step in when it counts, and they do it quietly, because the promise they keep is bigger than themselves. Maybe that's the lesson. The most powerful safety nets in our lives aren't institutions, but people. People who decide that no one gets left behind, no matter the rules, the time, or the recognition. Now I want to hear from you. In your own life, who has been that quiet protector? Have you ever stepped into that role for someone else? Share your stories in the comments, because sometimes telling them is how we keep these values alive. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because one day you might walk into a place like the Voss Tavern and think you're meeting just a bartender. And you never know. You might be looking at a hero who's been watching over you all along.